Welcome to Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Be sure to follow, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To schedule a therapy appointment, call us at 650-223-5605. For more information on this and other related topics, check out our blog at isotherapy.com, where you can also contact us through our website. I'm your host, Dalton Huckaby, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Hey there, Dalton Huckaby, licensed marriage and family therapist, host of Now Serving a Side of Therapy. We are continuing our deep dive into the topic of grief and loss. And today, we're going to talk more specifically about what that looks like for minors for non-death related matters of grief and loss. We've talked in prior episodes around how grief and loss just isn't in response to someone dying, right? As Gabor Mate puts it, it can be in response to something that didn't happen that should have, or something that should have happened that didn't. And so when I first started working with children, when I was working on my hours for my associate's license, I remember thinking how beneficial it can be for children to engage in therapy services at a younger age. I certainly know for at a younger age that I would have benefited from therapy services, right? And so that's part of why I got into this work, is to offer information and support in a way that I wish I had access to. Either way, just the idea here is offering therapy to minors in this framework around grief and loss, for example, can encourage the individual to learn how to identify emotions and engage in the processing of them and emotional regulation. How to learn and practice some coping skills in response to some stressors that they're experiencing, right? Or having that safe and trusting environment in the client-therapist relationship can be beneficial as well. And so whether it's through engaging in emotional and self-regulation, learning interpersonal skills, or just enhancing their overall self-awareness, right? I can't help but think that how those would have huge benefits in carrying over in their future life. And so the idea here, the intention, is that by them having access to this information and these skills and these tools and this self-awareness, right? Perhaps it might just not impede their functioning in relationships as they got older, because they've addressed and resolved some of these things earlier on. I have all these schools of thoughts, one of them being that in response to current stressors that we might be experiencing in our lives, right, that maybe were activated by something that's unidentified or unresolved from earlier on in our lives, right? And so that gets the idea of what I'm saying here, is that if a child has an opportunity to be able to engage in a healing process, maybe it can be beneficial for them later on down the road in their life. And so now there is a from my understanding, there's going to be a great need for further research around non-death related grief and loss matters and how we support working with minor children through a therapeutic lens for those matters. All right, so later on in a bit, we'll get to some maybe some interventions or some practices or some fun things that kiddos can do to engage in their own grief and loss process. But I just wanted to kind of give an example, right, of first. And so say, for example, a child is going through a divorce, right? Or not, their parents are going through a divorce. They're not going through a divorce. The parents are going through a divorce, right? And maybe they have to move. And then so now none of their friends are going to be at the new school, right? So that's a big change for them. That's definitely some grief and loss stuff happening there. And so say, for example, the individual was used to get good grades and got along well with everyone at school. And then now in their new environment, their grades are plummeting and they're getting in fights a lot, right? Well, what are some of the responses that the child might get, right? They might be told, oh, well, get over it. Do better, right? Well, we can see it's not very supportive, right? It's not what we want to. The idea here is there is a real benefit and a great need to take the time and to understand what thoughts and feelings are coming up for the child, right? And what's coming up for them as they're trying to adapt to these new environments and these new systems, right? By enhancing or having a better understanding of what they're experiencing, then can parents and teachers and doctors and other important people that are in the client social circles, can they seek to meet the client where they're at and provide them with that optimal support that they need based on what's going on for them. All right. And so even taking that example of, the kid and his parents are going through the divorce, right? We can imagine how what they're experiencing can be overshadowed by the parents having to move and, relocate and all the things that come with divorce. In fact, when my parents got divorced when I was younger, I don't remember anyone taking the time to ask me, hey, what's coming up for you as a result of this change, right? And so what can happen is that by the very act of the child's experiences and emotions and own thoughts kind of being overlooked in that process, then they're going to have a harder time trying to reacclimate and reorganize and restructure their lives after the change, because they've not had the support or being able to identify what they're experiencing. And so it is important, right, that we encourage family therapy and support for the kiddos. Certainly, and whenever we're working with minors, right, in some cases, right, we also oftentimes we want to involve the parents in therapy as well for like the family support. And, it's not only with, for kids with grief and loss, in multiple aspects, right? Research backs the idea that family support is a strong predictive factor of successful outcomes, again, in many respects. The same applies with grief and loss, right? And so we discussed the importance of support for successful navigation through grief. And in fact, a child's ability to cope following a loss seems to be influenced by the remaining parent's ability to provide support while also managing their own grief. Okay, and so that can be seen as something that Frears and Schneider urges in their article Exploring Loss and Grief Within a Holistic Framework. And but again, support systems don't just come from parents, right? They can come from, if the child is like, the teachers, or if they're having some after school programs, right? Or there's a mentor that they have, or a school counselor, right? Or even friends, right? Like the support comes from a wide variety of angles. And so there is another book called Using the Creative Therapies to Cope with Grief and Loss by Stephanie Brooke and Dorothy Maraglia. And so again, there are certainly, some books out there that you can look into around how to work with your child in processing grief and loss. And again, depending on the age, maybe you can use some stories that reflect, again, maybe parents going through divorce, right? If that's what the child's experiencing, find a book that talks about, that's age and developmentally appropriate, that talks about that experience. And you could even talk with the kiddo, what did you think about that character in the book, right? Or what did you think about this when this happened in the book, right? In the story. Then they, just by virtue of them telling you what their meaning making was after hearing the story, can give us some insights as to what they might be experiencing. or say, for example, maybe we'll stick with that example of the kid had to switch schools, right? And say they really like their other teacher at their other school, and now they're going to miss their teacher. Again, missing the teacher, grief and loss, right? Especially if that teacher was like a huge inspiration to them and a huge support, and all these things, right? And so in that case, what we could do is we could work with the individual and maybe have them do like write a letter, right? Like what is something that was what was the favorite memory that they had about the teacher, right? Or oftentimes, I've heard this saying that goes, sometimes it's not what people say to us that has an influence, but more so how they made us feel. And so I would ask that question, well, how did they make you feel? Right? Oh, they made me feel safe, or they helped me, feel more confident, right? And one of the underlying themes that I strive for in working with individuals is, even if it's unstated, right, is like this enhanced sense of self-confidence. And so there's could be also, especially kind of cultural based, right? There could be some rituals or customs that they can practice, whether it's having an altar, and I don't know, maybe they had like a school picture, right? Like a group picture from their class that with the teacher in it, right? That they could put on the altar, or maybe they got like a positive note back on one of the assignments, right? That they're still hanging on to, and they could put that up the altar, right? Or maybe they remember, oh, I remember making this thing in art class with the teacher, right? And they have a positive experience with that. They could put that at the altar, right? And so all these things that they can still display and honor in memory of the individual where they were experiencing grief and loss. Kind of, even, similarly, there could be like a box of memories, right? So whether you could write down again the way they made you feel and put that in the box, right? Or you could write down the memory, their favorite memory, they could put that in the box. So just a few different ways to work with minors to in this framework of grief and loss. Now, that being said, I must recognize my own limitations around working with minors with art therapy and with parent-child intervention therapy, PCIT. And so art therapy and PCIT are excellent ways for minors to express themselves and work through the challenging feelings, for example, around grief and loss, and also like how to, and through PCIT, how to work towards that attunement with other people, right? If they're experiencing grief and loss and not being heard or supported, we can see how they might kind of retreat and withdraw, right? And so through this lens of kind of PCIT, it does offer a framework towards kind of like enhancing attunement, which is what would be that goal in that particular case for that client. So I must acknowledge my own limitations in those areas, and yet we can still apply some of these more fun and creative ways to engage minors or children or adolescents, right, in engaging in their own grief and loss process. And it's gonna feel weird, especially if they've never had anyone asking them these kinds of questions before, right? Or taking the time to acknowledge that, yes, what you're experiencing, your thoughts and emotions matter, right? In fact, in episodes 28 and 29, we spoke with LMFT Mateus Porter, and he encourages this aspect of support that we've been talking about. And he also emphasized that our experiences around grief and loss and the thoughts, emotions, and reactions that we have in response to them matter. And so check out this episode with Mateus, where he encourages the practice of honoring our experience by identifying and processing emotions that are coming up and learning how to better understand them and regulate them.
When people wrap themselves in just one thing, and they see themselves as only that one thing, and then that one thing ends, then they're left like, what now? What is up with my life now? What do I do? Like, what are my goals?
Yeah, it can relieve a big hole for people, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it does. Like I still have dreams of playing, like little dreams of me like on the field or about to get on the field or stuff like that. It's still like every week, at least once a week, I have dreams still. And so a coach told me a long time ago that I may be done with sports, but it's not done with me, and that might be because I'm having dreams about it. Like I still am like in it.
Yeah, that's the way
So
it
yeah,
expresses itself. Since you're not actively doing it, that's the way it's
right,
kind of expressing itself in your being. Yeah.
right,
And within that, right, within that end of, like you said, with that transition phase, right, there
mhm,
can be grief and loss in that. Right.
absolutely,
So just to be able to acknowledge that, like grief and loss shows up in so many ways we may not even recognize, right? Even
absolutely,
if it's like, oh man, I was really hoping to be able to score a touchdown that game and I didn't, right? There's
mhm,
grief and loss in that alone.
absolutely. It's the idea of like, what was I expecting to do? And since that didn't happen, like I'm grieving now. And a lot of people, they just gloss over that and think it doesn't matter. Um, but it does to the people that are in it, it does. And
What's
so,
something that they might say, right? They might say something like, well, I have to try harder next time, right?
mhm,
Or
mhm,
something like that, where it
mhm,
might be this kind of like, and that, like you said, to your point, that can be the mentality in the
mhm,
sport too, right?
yeah,
Which has a certain play. I don't want to completely disown that because it has some credit and some there's
absolutely.
some applicability for that too, right? It's just like with the saboteurs, which is something else we can get into. It's like they're there for a reason and they have a purpose, right? It's just to the point that they're causing us more distress than good, that's where we want to start looking at things.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, I've heard so many things. I won't get into all of the things that I've heard coaches say and parents say. It's probably
makes
not
makes you
appropriate
go
for this.
yeah. Fair,
but,
fair.
but
But let's just say it's
overall,
not supportive. Is that what you would say?
yes, not supportive at all. It's more about like suck it up, move on. It doesn't matter. Which the thing is, there like there's some of that is true, some of it, and the part that's true is that yes, there is a game tomorrow, right? And you're gonna play. So yeah, there is a part of you that has to move forward to that game, right? But in the moment, are we just going to ignore what just happened? You know, and the idea of just suck it up and move on doesn't just stay in those couple years that you play your sport. Now you're out of your sport and you're still having that same mindset of just stuffing it down, like let's not talk about that because it's too hard, or just whatever the case is. Like we start to um, uh, embody these thoughts and uh, messages that just do not serve us anymore. And they didn't
Exactly.
serve us before too. There's, like I said, some of it is true. Yes, we need to move on to the next player, next game, and it's the and part.
It's the
We
yes
have
and.
to,
I love this yes
right,
and. I'm here for it.
right. We have to acknowledge what we are going through right now, and so yeah, I am a huge believer in just like being present in whatever is coming up now and preparing for what's going to come later.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.